The sun bled over the jagged silhouette of the Cumberland Plateau, painting the eastern sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple. It was 5:30 a.m., and on Blackwood Bend, a sprawling, albeit modest, cattle ranch nestled in the rural quiet of White County, Tennessee, Silas Blackwood was already up. He'd been up for an hour, the scent of strong coffee and wood smoke mingling in the air of his small, tidy farmhouse. Silas wasn't a man of extravagance, but his life was rich in routine and the quiet satisfaction of honest labor. His 56 years had etched lines of sun and worry around his blue eyes, but they held a steady, unwavering gaze that spoke of deep-rooted resilience, much like the ancient oaks dotting his property. His days unfurled with a predictable rhythm, a comforting cadence that was as much a part of Blackwood Bend as the lowing of his cattle. He'd feed the dogs first, two loyal blue-tick hounds, Rusty and Belle, their eager barks the only true clamor in the early morning stillness. Then a quick breakfast of oatmeal and toast, the local Sparta newspaper spread open on his worn kitchen table. He'd scan the headlines, shake his head at the follies of Washington, and linger on local news, sometimes spotting a familiar name. After that, it was out to the barn. The air would be crisp, carrying the earthy scent of hay and manure, a fragrance that was, to Silas, the very smell of home. He'd check on his herd, mending a loose fence post here, coaxing a stubborn calf there. His hands, gnarled and strong from decades of work, moved with an almost unconscious efficiency. He knew every inch of his land, every dip and rise, every hidden creek bed and stand of timber. It was more than just property. It was an extension of himself, a legacy carved out of the Tennessee soil. Silas wasn't married, had no children. His closest living relative was his younger sister, Martha, who lived an hour and a half away in Knoxville. They spoke every Sunday evening without fail, a ritual that had endured for 30 years. Martha, sharp-witted and pragmatic, often worried about Silas living so far out, so alone. But Silas would just chuckle, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Ain't alone, Martha. Got the cows, got the dogs, got the land. What more could a man ask for?" He wasn't entirely a hermit. He'd make his weekly run into Sparta for feed and supplies, always stopping at Brenda's diner for a slice of pecan pie and a cup of lukewarm coffee, exchanging pleasantries with Brenda and the handful of other regulars. He was a familiar, dependable presence, a thread in the fabric of the community, even if a somewhat frayed and quiet one. That autumn of 1998, the leaves were turning early, painting the hillsides in a breathtaking, melancholic tapestry of crimson and gold. The air carried the crisp promise of winter, and Silas was busy preparing his ranch, stacking firewood, checking the integrity of his barns against the coming cold. There had been a minor tiff with Jedediah Stone, a younger, harder man who'd bought the neighboring property 5 years prior. Jed had a reputation for pushing boundaries, literally, and there'd been an ongoing, low-level dispute over a section of fence line that both men claimed. It was nothing new in rural life, a familiar dance of stubbornness and perceived slight. Silas had handled it with his usual quiet firmness, refusing to be bullied but also unwilling to escalate it into a full-blown feud. "Some folks just gotta learn the hard way," he'd told Martha over the phone, "but I ain't the one to teach 'em if I can help it." Life on Blackwood Bend continued its measured pace, a testament to endurance, a reflection of the man who called it home. The first crack in that predictable rhythm came on a Sunday evening, the last day of October 1998. Martha Blackwood, perched on her sofa in Knoxville, the cordless phone pressed to her ear, waited. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. Silas never missed their call. He was old-fashioned. If he said he'd call, he called. If she called, he answered. She tried again, the distant, hollow ring echoing in the silence of her own living room. No answer. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It wasn't like him. Not at all. She waited an hour, then tried his number again. Still nothing. Her mind, usually so logical, began to conjure images: a fall, a sudden illness, something dreadful happening to her brother, alone on that isolated ranch. She called Deputy Rick Miller at the White County Sheriff's Office, a man she knew vaguely from her occasional visits. His voice was tired but polite. "Mrs. Blackwood, he's a grown man. Might just be out or sleeping." Martha's voice, usually calm, was edged with a tremor. "Deputy, Silas Blackwood is a creature of habit. He's never just out after dark on a Sunday, and he'd certainly answer my call." "Something's wrong." Miller, sensing the genuine worry, promised to swing by in the morning if she still hadn't heard from him. Monday dawned, bleak and overcast, still no word. Martha's concern had escalated into a cold, dread certainty. She called Deputy Miller again, her voice unwavering this time. "I'm telling you, Deputy, something's seriously wrong." She then called Old Man Hemlock, a distant neighbor who lived a few miles down the winding country road, mostly to get a different perspective. Hemlock, his voice raspy with age and disuse, confirmed her fears. "Ain't seen Silas's truck, that old Ford F-150, for a few days now. Thought maybe he was just laying low, but you say he ain't answering." That ain't right, the words sent a fresh wave of panic through Martha. Silas's truck was his lifeline, an extension of his will. He didn't just not use it. Unable to wait any longer, Martha made the drive herself, the picturesque autumn scenery blurring into a menacing tunnel as her anxiety mounted. The hour and a half felt like an eternity. As she turned off the main highway onto the gravel road leading to Blackwood Bend, her heart pounded against her ribs. The gate, usually latched securely, was ajar, swinging lazily in the cold morning breeze. A shiver ran down her spine. This was wrong. Silas was meticulous about his gates. She drove slowly up the long, winding driveway, the crunch of gravel beneath her tires the only sound. The farmhouse stood silent, its windows like vacant eyes. No lights were on. The dogs, Rusty and Belle, usually so boisterous, emerged from around the side of the house, whimpering, their tails low. They were restless, agitated, and thin. They hadn't been fed, Martha realized with a sickening lurch. Silas never, ever neglected his animals. She parked her car and approached the house, her steps heavy. The front door was unlocked, another anomaly. Her hand trembled as she pushed it open. The house was cold, silent, and still. The breakfast dishes from Sunday morning were still on the table, unwashed. The Sparta newspaper lay open to the comics section, but the most chilling discovery was in the kitchen. Silas's leather wallet, containing his driver's license and a few crumpled bills, lay on the counter next to his house keys. His truck keys, however, were conspicuously absent. And outside, where his weathered Ford F-150 should have been, the gravel driveway was empty. Silas Blackwood and his truck had vanished. Martha's call to Deputy Miller this time was less a report and more a plea, her voice raw with a fear that transcended mere concern. Miller, a man in his late 40s whose face held the perpetual weariness of small-town law enforcement, arrived within the hour, his patrol car kicking up a cloud of dust. He surveyed the quiet ranch, the uneaten dog food, the open gate, the empty space where Silas's truck should have been. Even to his jaded eyes, something felt profoundly wrong. The initial investigation was a flurry of activity, though ultimately unproductive. Deputy Miller and a few other deputies from the White County Sheriff's Office meticulously scoured the farmhouse. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle. Nothing was obviously missing, apart from Silas and his truck. It looked as if he had simply walked out of his kitchen, grabbed his truck keys, and vanished into thin air. But the wallet and house keys left behind contradicted that notion. He wasn't planning a trip, not without his identification or money. Neighbors were questioned. Old Man Hemlock reiterated his last sighting, vague and distant, of Silas's truck heading down the road a few days prior. Jedediah Stone, the neighbor with whom Silas had the boundary dispute, was curt and uncooperative. He claimed he hadn't seen Silas in weeks, not since their last argument over the fence line, a trivial disagreement he dismissed as just typical farmer stuff. His answers were clipped, his gaze evasive, but there was no concrete evidence to link him to anything. Miller knew Jed had a temper, a history of minor infractions, but nothing that suggested murder. Search parties were quickly organized. Volunteers from Sparta and the surrounding areas, a mix of local farmers, church members, and concerned citizens, joined deputies in combing the dense woods surrounding Blackwood Bend. The landscape of White County, with its rolling hills, deep ravines, and thick stands of oak and pine, was beautiful but unforgiving. The Caney Fork River, winding its way through the valley, was dragged, its murky waters yielding only debris and fallen branches. The searches extended for days, then weeks, growing increasingly desperate. Every fallen log, every hidden hollow, every abandoned shed was meticulously checked. Dogs were brought in, their keen noses tracking scents that quickly dissipated in the cool autumn air. But there was no trace of Silas, no tire tracks leading off into unknown paths, no discarded clothing, no sign of a struggle. Nothing. The distinctive old Ford F-150, a faded red 1988 model, was also nowhere to be found. Its VIN was entered into national databases, its description broadcast on local news channels and statewide alerts. Every truck stop, every gas station, every backroad diner between Sparta and the state line was given Silas's photo and the truck's details. It was as if both man and machine had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape of central Tennessee. Martha, meanwhile, refused to give up. She plastered missing person posters with Silas's kind, weathered face on every lamppost, every grocery store bulletin board, every truck stop bathroom from Cookville to Nashville. She spoke to reporters, her voice trembling but resolute, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. The local community rallied around her initially, offering meals, support, and continued help with the searches. But as days bled into weeks and weeks into months, the initial fervor began to wane. The leads dried up. The tips, mostly speculative or born of misplaced sympathy, led nowhere. The White County Sheriff's Office, with its limited resources, had exhausted every avenue. Silas Blackwood had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and the haunting silence of his empty ranch. The raw ache of uncertainty gnawed at Martha. The initial shock gave way to a dull, persistent pain, a constant throb of grief that found no closure. She returned to Blackwood Bend frequently, tending to Silas's neglected cattle, selling them off gradually, her heart breaking with each transaction. The farmhouse grew dusty, cold, and quiet, a tomb to a life abruptly interrupted. She couldn't bring herself to sell the property, holding onto a sliver of hope that Silas would one day walk back through that unlocked door. The ranch became a monument to his absence, its fences slowly sagging, its barns weathering under the relentless march of seasons. 6 months into the disappearance, with the local investigation stalled, Martha, through persistent appeals to her state senator, finally got the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, involved. Detective Evelyn Reed, a meticulous woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for dogged persistence, was assigned to the case. Reed, fresh from a string of cold cases solved in East Tennessee, brought a renewed, if cautious, optimism. She meticulously reviewed Deputy Miller's files, re-interviewed every witness, and tried to pry open every crack in the narrative. Reed spent weeks immersed in Silas's life, scrutinizing his financial records. He was solvent, had no major debts, no secret lavish expenditures, no sudden withdrawals. His life was, on paper, as predictable as his routines. She explored every conceivable motive, robbery, but nothing valuable was taken. A sudden departure, but he left his wallet and never touched his bank accounts. An accident, but no body, no truck, no sign. She delved deeper into the land dispute with Jedediah Stone. Jed's alibi for the likely time of Silas's disappearance, he claimed to be working alone on his distant south pasture, was flimsy but couldn't be disproven. Reed found no evidence to suggest Jed was violent enough to commit murder over a fence line. Still, Jed's surly demeanor and evasiveness always kept him on a short list of persons of interest, albeit a list without any concrete evidence. Years bled into each other. 1999 turned to 2000, then 2001, 2002. The case of Silas Blackwood, once the talk of White County, slowly faded from public memory, relegated to the archives of local law enforcement and the anguished corners of Martha's mind. Posters weathered and tore. The early missing persons websites Martha had painstakingly created, rudimentary by today's standards, received fewer and fewer hits. Deputy Miller, now Sheriff Miller, had been promoted, but the Blackwood case remained a stain on his tenure, a mystery that defied resolution. He still harbored a quiet guilt, wondering if he'd missed something in those crucial early days. Detective Reed, though moving on to other cases, periodically pulled Silas's file, rereading the cold reports, hoping a new detail, a forgotten name, a new piece of technology, would emerge to crack the impenetrable wall of silence. Martha aged, the worry lines deepening, her once vibrant eyes now holding a perpetual shadow. She navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth of legal declarations for Silas's estate, a grim acknowledgement of his likely death, even without a body. But she never gave up. Every distant siren, every news report of discovered remains, sent a jolt of terror and hope through her. The not knowing was a torment more profound than any certainty. She imagined Silas, sometimes lost and confused, sometimes captured and suffering. The emptiness of Blackwood Bend, the rustle of leaves in the wind, seemed to whisper his name, a phantom presence haunting the Tennessee hills. The Blackwood case became a local legend, a chilling tale whispered around bonfires, the rancher who simply vanished, swallowed whole by the rugged, unforgiving landscape, a stark reminder of how easily life could be erased in the vast wilderness of the Cumberland Plateau. 5 years rolled by, each one heavier than the last for Martha. Fall 2003 arrived, bringing with it a particularly harsh, dry spell followed by torrential rains, a dramatic shift in the Tennessee weather that carved new paths through the ancient earth. It was a Saturday in mid-November when the silence was finally, violently broken. Deep within the Bridgestone Firestone Centennial Wilderness area, a vast expanse of rugged, protected land that bordered a distant corner of what had once been Blackwood Bend, 3 deer hunters from Ohio were making their way through an area rarely traversed by locals. They were experienced outdoorsmen, equipped with the latest GPS technology that allowed them to navigate the trackless forest with unprecedented precision. They were venturing into a part of the wilderness known for its treacherous ravines and sinkholes, its ancient pines and thick undergrowth creating a labyrinth of shadows and hidden dangers. The recent heavy rains had swollen the small creeks into torrents, eroding banks and exposing previously concealed natural features. One of the hunters, a burly man named Frank Henderson, was picking his way carefully down a steep, slippery embankment that led to a narrow, water-filled gulch, little more than a fissure in the earth, when his boot dislodged a thick clump of mud. As the mud slid away, it revealed a glint of faded red metal. Curiosity piqued, Frank called his companions over. They carefully descended, slipping and sliding on the slick, leaf-strewn ground until they stood at the bottom of the gulch. There, partially submerged in murky water and almost entirely swallowed by a tangle of thorny vines and ancient kudzu, was the unmistakable shape of a vehicle. It was rusted, decaying, and seemed to have been there for an impossibly long time. A chill ran through Frank, deeper than the autumn air. He knew instinctively that this was more than just an abandoned wreck. The men struggled through the thicket, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. As they cleared away some of the overgrowth, the outline of a pickup truck emerged, an old Ford F-150, its once vibrant red paint now a dull, oxidized rust. It was positioned at an odd angle, not as if it had rolled down accidentally, but as if it had been deliberately driven or pushed into the ravine, its front end buried deep in the muddy floor. With a growing sense of dread, they peered into the cab through the shattered remnants of the driver's side window. The interior was a swamp of mud, leaves, and what looked like skeletal remains, eerily draped in tatters of clothing. The sight was horrifying, a tableau frozen in time, a silent testament to a forgotten tragedy. One of the hunters, his face pale, stumbled backward, fumbling for his satellite phone to call the authorities. Within hours, the remote ravine was swarming with emergency personnel. Sheriff Miller, his face grim, recognized the make and model of the truck almost immediately. The VIN, visible even through the grime, confirmed it. This was Silas Blackwood's missing Ford F-150. Detective Reed, notified by the TBI, was on the scene by nightfall, her face etched with a mix of grim satisfaction and profound sadness. The long-sought answer to Silas's disappearance had been found, but it was far more sinister than anyone had dared to truly articulate. The recovery effort was painstaking. The ravine was steep and inaccessible, requiring specialized equipment to hoist the rusted hulk of the truck out. Forensic teams, their faces masked against the stench of decomposition, worked meticulously, sifting through every ounce of mud and debris. Inside the truck, amidst the skeletal remains, they made the definitive identification. Dental records confirmed it was Silas Blackwood, but the most terrifying discovery was yet to come. The medical examiner's report delivered the cold, hard truth. Silas Blackwood had not died in an accident. There was a single, clean bullet entry wound at the base of his skull. He had been shot from behind, execution style, and then his body, still inside his truck, had been driven or pushed into that remote, hidden gulch, deliberately concealed for eternity. The mud, the dense foliage, the sheer inaccessibility of the location had conspired to keep his secret for 5 agonizing years. The discovery sent a tremor through White County, ripping open old wounds and reviving a cold case with horrifying new clarity. Silas Blackwood hadn't just vanished. He had been murdered, his life extinguished with malice, and his remains left to decompose in an unmarked grave of steel and earth. The quiet, unsettling mystery of his disappearance was replaced by the terrifying, visceral reality of homicide. Detective Reed reopened the case with a renewed, fierce determination. Every piece of the old puzzle was re-examined through the grim lens of murder. Jedediah Stone, the surly neighbor, became more than just a person of interest. He was now the primary focus. His land dispute with Silas, once dismissed as minor, now took on a chilling new significance. Had a trivial boundary disagreement escalated into something far more deadly? Or was there something else entirely, a hidden motive that Silas had taken to his watery, muddy grave? The terror wasn't just in the violent manner of Silas's death. nor in the calculated act of concealment that had kept the truth hidden for so long. It was in the chilling realization that a murderer had walked among them, undetected, for 5 years, living their life while Silas lay forgotten in a remote ravine. It was the stark, brutal confirmation that the quiet, dependable rancher had met a terrifying end, not by mischance or nature's whim, but by the deliberate, cold-blooded hand of another human being. The landscape of Tennessee, once a source of comfort and solitude for Silas, had become his grave, holding its grim secret until a twist of fate and the relentless march of time finally revealed the terrifying truth.